You know that story. And then she came all the way to Mecca, to the Caliph of Islam, and told him, you said your religion is one of fairness and justice. My property has been taken, and they have put up a mosque there. The woman was asked, how much do you want for that property? We'll give you any amount of money you want. She said, my property is not for sale. And she was Jewish. What did the Caliph of Islam say? Go and demolish the mosque. And the mosque was demolished. And the property to the Jewish lady was restored in the manner she wanted it. That's our religion. That's our religion. And God has guaranteed it. So for us Muslims, let us not fight people because we're showing the bad example right now through all these terrorist organizations. And then, there is no two democracies that are identical twins in this world. The Brits are the ones who colonized us, and they colonized my brothers, the Omanis, who are our brothers, because we have a lot in common with them and historical. They colonized us in Eastern Africa. Actually, they brought us civilization those days. They did not colonize us. But nonetheless, they were there. But the British themselves do not have that strict separation of law. You're a legal mind like me. The Lord Chancellor is the head of the judiciary. He's a minister in the cabinet, and he's a lawmaker in the House of Lords. He's a lawmaker in the House of Lords. That's why I think one of the best democracies right now in the Muslim world is the Omani democracy and the Kuwaiti democracy, where there is a serious synergy between the traditional historical sultans who are there and the element of democracy itself and the choice of the people. That's why we say, let's look, every country has got to look for the best way for it to live, and that's how you craft your constitution, on the basis of the things that matter. The things that matter in Kenya is different from the things that matter so much in Pakistan and other places. Let me now go back to my speech. We are now deliberating on the Constitution in an age of crisis, navigating challenges. Some of the key questions that would be asked and explored are what is there already. I'm sure you've seen it. What are the risks associated with invoking emergency powers or suspending the constitutional protection during times of crisis, and how to minimize it? You can have all sorts of problems in a country, which democracy at that time in its own constitution is not able to deal with it. But they say, the law can be an ass. I'm sorry to use that word, but it's the law. Until you amend it or you repeal it, it remains the law. So when you have a military dictatorship that was there in a place one time, or you have a kingdom and they had certain constitution, you don't overthrow that constitution, you amend it. When a military wants to take over from the political class because it is convinced the political class is not doing anything good, then they have to find a way to amend or repeal those constitutions based on the rules of the day. But the moment you take the law into your own hands, the moment the military aspect of it is no longer controlled by the civilians, the civilian structure, parliament, prime ministers, presidents who are elected, then it's a state of anarchy, and a state of anarchy will lead to another state of anarchy, and a state of anarchy, and a state of anarchy. We as Muslims have something to fall back on. One of the most glaring examples in our history is how we became Shias and Sunnis, because young men took the law into their hands and killed the Khalifa of Islam, the man who controlled the world at that time. And there were forces all the way to Jerusalem, all the way to Sin, all the way to near Andalus. And he was killed by a few young men who took Uthman bin Affan, came into his own house and slaughtered him. They took the law into their own hands. The instruments of government was no longer in the hands of the leadership that was there, the established leadership. Whether it is through parliament, whether it is through a king, whether it is through a leader, the way it was that time, Khalifa, there was anarchy. And then anarchy leads to another anarchy. Until today, we still have the problem. Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib was also killed, and God knows how many others were killed. And in the process, his own children were killed, so much so that we do have some of these divides right now, which came as a result of that incident. And progressively, if it can't learn from history and avoid some of the pitfalls of history, we'll never be able to go into the future. We pride ourselves as having a civilization and a deen that is haqq, but again, we are not learning from history. So there is need for that. Now let me go straight to my speech. Where a constitutional crisis arises because the constitution is legally ambiguous, by the way, which in every case, all over the world, constitutions are ambiguous. The ultimate resolution usually establishes the legal precedent to resolve future crises of the constitutional administration. Such was the case in the United States presidential succession of John Taylor, which established that a successor to the presidency assumes office without any limitation. A constitutional crisis can lead to administrative paralysis, and therefore it's important to address the threats to the constitution itself. What are the threats? The political class. First and foremost, the political class may present threats to the constitution itself, where the political class enter into pre- or post-political election pacts and agitating and influencing masses wrongly through demonstrations. My dear brothers and sisters, demonstrations have never achieved anything. I think the only time that demonstrations achieved something is when Mahatma Gandhi was doing those demonstrations. What did we do? We said the Arab Spring, we're going to bring democracy and human rights to the Arab Spring. How did we end up? Is Libya any better than it was that time today? It's destroyed. Is Syria any better? Is Iraq any better? Is Sudan going to be any better? Is Somalia any better? You see, because there are it's not muqaddas, it is not the Holy Quran. When you say democracy and human rights, the very people who are telling you democracy and human rights are the people who practiced slavery for 480 years. The man who wrote the Declaration of Independence in the United States of America, Thomas Jefferson, was a slave owner himself. So whenever you see some of this stuff that comes from the West, UK, House of Commons, America, Europe, and the rest of it, read it first of all, understand what's genuine. They talk about equality. Where was equality at that time? Where the black man was described as a 3/5 of a man. I was watching something the other day where this extremism is coming into place. And the Indians who got the independence through, Indians who got the independence through, I was hearing the other day when somebody was being interviewed, an Indian minister, and he was told, why are you mistreating the Muslims there? Don't you have equality in your law? You know what he said? Equality can only be among equals. You saw that? He said equality among equals. The Muslims are not equal to us. And that's what he said. And that's supposed to be the biggest democracy in the world. So I'm trying to tell you why I'm going through all these things is that the threats to the Constitution are there. The Constitution is not an end in itself. You people have got to decide what's best for you in the best interest of your own people. And we have history to fall back on. Now, let me see, it's the political class. And then there's what you call the emboldened hardliners, the hardliners, people who feel a sense of entitlement. We must rule ourselves. We must do this. We must produce the king or must produce the prime ministers and those kind of things. Non-state actors, Taliban, Al-Shabaab, ISIS, God knows who, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Taliban, non-state actors who have taken away the monopoly of firepower. The monopoly of firepower must be in the government, period. Nobody else. And if there's a system which was in place, change that system through the system itself. That's why God, in his wisdom, created for us antibiotics. Antibiotics is that they take the disease itself, culture the disease, and use the disease to cure the disease. So if you have a bad constitution, use that same constitution to cure the badness of that constitution. There must be something. And the other thing is that military coups, the military. Military has always got to be at the behest of the civilian government. We had it from the very beginning. Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam What do you call with Umar bin Khattab, Abu Bakr bin Abu Bakr Siddiq, all, historically. And the other one is corruption, theft, where you don't see the difference between what belongs to the state and what belongs to you. Prophet ﷺ put a cloth in his stomach because he was so hungry. He came to Aisha and asked us, is there food? She said, no, there's no food. He said, but today I'm going to fast. And he fasted that day. There has to be a difference between leadership and wealth. That's why Umar bin Khattab was in the mosque when this big king who was not a Muslim came in there and he was told this is the leader of the Muslims. He was shocked because he did not see everything. And he was just an ordinary person with tattered clothes. You know the history very well. So when you are in leadership, it is not your right to take away from the masses. You have to live a frugal life. You have to be poor. If not poor, slightly comfortable. But not use that to become the richest person. And we have that in Africa. You see, the richest person in a country is a president, the next president is second richest, the next president is the third richest, the other president is the third, and everybody wants to now go to government because it's easier for you to make money through the government than to go and put up industries and farms. So politics becomes a business. And the other thing is multinational corporations. The West, they don't want any strong third world country which has a lot of resources. No. And how do you get to it? Corrupt the leadership class. Create all these things. All the coups are created by countries that profess to be democratic. And all these things, you see that. The other thing, ethnicity. At least the West, the Western world, if you ask an American, a typical American middle-class person today, what is his original roots? He has no roots. He has an English, maybe ancestry. He has what do you call Italian somewhere. He has a German somewhere. He has a Scandinavian somewhere. He has all this. So he does not have a roots. He's there just as an American. But for us, we go through that ethnicity and we maintain our families, our clans, our ethnicities, the way we have it in a country like Somalia, 100% Muslims, 100% the same language, 100% the same madhab Shafi'i, but they still find a reason to fight one another through those family lines. So we have problems. And then class wars. Lack of education. Masses are not educated. If the masses are not educated, then of course you can take away their rights. Or you misuse them. You can bring out 1 million people into the streets because they don't have education. You look for a populist way to appeal to them and then you use them. Constitutions are a living document. They're living documents. Keep on changing them. In accordance with the people, it's a living document. It's not rigid. You can't have it rigid. If you don't like certain aspect of it that applied 60 years ago, today do not apply. So in this age, you have to change. Supremacy of parliament. Sovereignty of parliament, they call it. I think it's important for the sovereignty of parliament to be unfettered, in my opinion. To be unfettered. Parliament can even make an unconstitutional law, but when they make it, you can now challenge it in a court of law. But you cannot stop parliament from legislating. You see what I mean? So unfettered. And finally, I'm sorry I've taken too long, activist judiciary. Jurists who want to legislate from the bench. Nonsense, absolute nonsense. That is going to erode and destroy the Constitution. Because if there's a lacuna in law and a certain matter is not provided, you maintain the status quo ante and you tell them Parliament should make the law for us to be able to deal with this thing. There's no law for this. There are many things that come before courts where there's no law. Don't borrow from anywhere else. Don't create it from your mind. If it's not in a written law, you just say that, look, this is not provided, so let Parliament go and provide. They have a role to do. Let them legislate. So these are the kind of things I had elaborated them, but because I have a very little time and my good friend here who is moderating the session is telling me that you've taken too long, this is my position. I think Constitution is the Constitution. It could be a bad Constitution, but change it using the article of the Constitution that allow for you to change it. Don't change it through any other extra constitutional means, no. Don't concentrate what you call firepower in the hands of non-state actors. You have no right to carry weapons. You have no right. That should be the monopoly of the state itself. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very inspiring and very. Thank you. Thank you.
I was listening to the remarks and the observations made by Mr. Farah in detail, and I would like to very briefly introduce my learned friend that he has held a very important position in Kenyan government, and because the knowledge which he was spreading here and sharing with all the participants, I hold this view that you all shall be informed that he has been Deputy Speaker of the Parliament of Kenya from 2008 to 2013. And as a Member of Parliament, Mr. Ahmed has been vocal on issues related to foreign policy and has been critical of Kenyan government policies on issues such as corruption and terrorism, which we all noted in his remarks. Currently, he is MP Dab constituency chairperson of committees. Very briefly, I will just refer to all the participants here with regard to the Constitution of Pakistan. Very briefly, that Constitution of Pakistan, as he said, is a living, I would add, it's a breathing document. And it has solution and it caters for all the situations which we are and we can face in times to come. The state, the challenges which our state can face, the challenges which can be faced by the provinces with regard to social and economic and our national security. So very briefly, I will just read the basic theme. It's the Constitution has its all connections with the divine book, our Holy Quran. And we follow all the verses and all those verses which have been explaining the social order in respect of the fundamental rights of the people, in respect of the rights of the state, the judicial system, all the concepts, the knowledge we have adopted in this document have been adopted through the divine book. It's provided in the preamble of the Constitution. Very briefly, I'll just go through the few important points. Maybe I'm also taking someone's time. The sovereignty over the entire universe, I'm reading the Constitution. This is our preamble. And I would request all the participants to listen to these few words. Whereas the sovereignty over the entire universe belongs to Almighty Allah alone, and the authority to be exercised by the people of Pakistan within the limits prescribed by him is a sacred trust. And whereas it is the will of the people of Pakistan to establish an order, so in 1973, all members who were representing the people of Pakistan agreed on a social order that is governing and will govern the state Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And the elected representative of the people of Pakistan agreed upon that document with consensus. And I would also request, if you have time, to go through those parliamentary debates. Those parliamentary debates, in all parliamentary debates, you will come across arguments which will contribute a lot to your knowledge with regard to Constitution. And in the preamble it is provided, wherein the state shall exercise its power and the authority through the chosen representatives. That is the concept of democracy. The chosen representative of the people. Within the principle of democracy, freedom, equality, tolerance, social justice, as enunciated by Islam, shall be observed. Wherein the Muslims shall be enabled to order their lives in the individual and collective affairs in accordance with the teachings and requirements of Islam as set out in the Holy Quran and Sunnah. And in the end, wherein adequate provision shall be made for the minorities freely to profess and practice their religions and develop their cultures. So the Constitution of Pakistan covers and caters for all the communities. It covers and it caters for all the situations and for the situations which which the state and the challenges which state can face in the future. Now, from here, I would like to request our next panelist, Mr. Atazov Shelobek. If I will apologize if I have some problem with pronouncing the name. Honorable Mr. Atazov is Member of Parliament, Chair of International Affairs, Defense, Security and Immigration Committee of Parliament of Kyrgyz Republic. Other than his political career, he has remained a champion of various international tournaments. Oh, we have a sportsman here. From 2000 to 2010. Well, we have some history with sportsmen in Pakistan. My Honorable, I will request to please proceed.
Чоң рахмат. Бисмиллахир-рахманир-рахим. Урматтуу Раджа Первес Ашраф Мырза.
Respected Raja Pervez Ashraf, respected participants of the event.
Биринчиде кезекте боордош жана диндеш
First, I would like to
Пакистан Ислам Республикасынын Конституциясынын 50 жылдык юбилейи менен Кыргыз Республикасынын Жогорку Кеңешинин төрагасы Шакиев Нурланбек Тургунбековичтин жана жалпы эле Жогорку Кеңештин атынан чын жүрөктөн куттуктайм.
First, I would like to congratulate with the 50th anniversary of Constitution from the name of the Speaker of the Parliament of the Kyrgyz Republic, Nurlanbek Shakiev.
Раджа Первес Ашраф Мырзага терең ыраазычылык билдирем.
I would like to express my gratitude to Honorable Speaker Raja Pervez Ashraf.
Дипломатиялык мамилелер
The diplomatic relations between Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan were established on 10th May 1992.
Орнотулганын 30 жылдыгына карата эки өлкөнүн ортосунда бир катар иш-чаралар өткөрүлдү.
Last year there were several events held on in order to participate, in order to celebrate 30th anniversary of Constitution.
Ишенимдүү мамилелердин жогорку деңгээлдеги
The cooperation between Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan is considered as a friendly and brotherly.
Бириккен Улуттар уюму, Шанхай кызматташтык уюму,
In order to develop multilateral cooperation, there is a cooperation in terms of SCO, OEs, and other international organizations.
Улутту өзүнүн дини, өзүнүн тили жана конституциясы менен сыймыктанат.
Each country is led by its constitution, by its national language, and by its territory.
Кабыл алынганына 30 жыл толуп турат.
Kyrgyz Republic is also celebrating 30th anniversary of the Constitution. Just recently, guarantee of the Constitution, respected President, participated in 30th anniversary celebration of the Constitution in Bishkek city. The main articles in the Constitution of Kyrgyzstan is human rights protection, protection of the freedoms of people, and protection of democratic principles and main laws of the state.
Pakistandын аскердик техникалык жана соода-экономикалык чөйрөдөгү эбегейсиз потенциалын
Kyrgyzstan highly esteems the high potential of Kyrgyzstan in military, technical, and trade economic cooperation, and Kyrgyzstan highly values the necessity of cooperation of the countries of the region. Trade economic cooperation between Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan, and scientific, technical. There is an intergovernmental commission on scientific, technical, and trade economic cooperation working between Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan. Just recently, the charter flights started between Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan. And on the regular basis, there are charter regular flights between Bishkek and Lahore and Bishkek and Islamabad. I also consider it important to create the investment fund between two countries. Dear participants, yesterday we met with Minister of Sports and Tourism of Pakistan, and we know that there is a good potential for development of tourism between Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan. And this direction is considered to be one most active in terms of bilateral relations. There are more than 11,000 students studying from Pakistan and Kyrgyzstan, mostly in medical universities. Inshallah, they'll get back to Pakistan and give a good service to people of Pakistan. People of Pakistan are respecting human rights, love the freedom, and we highly esteem them as people who are following the democratic principles. And we really highly esteem the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Quaid al-Azam Juma, and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto as the most influential politicians in Pakistan's history. I think that the bilateral cooperation between Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan will be on the high level further. I congratulate Honorable Speaker Raja Pervez Ashraf and basically people of Pakistan with today's 50th anniversary of Constitution. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, and my all best wishes for the people of Kyrgyzstan, and all prayers for development of strong ties between Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan. Now, moving from here, I would request my honorable colleague, not colleague, but a dear friend. I've met him a number of times in Westminster, and I had opportunity of having good food in the cafeteria of Westminster a number of times, and he is a great host as well for all the members of the parliament going to Westminster from Pakistan. Mr. Khalid Mahmood. Honorable Khalid Mahmood is a member of the parliament of Pakistani Kashmiri origin in the United Kingdom for Birmingham Parish Bar since 2001. He is the honor of being first Muslim member of the parliament in United Kingdom and remains the longest serving Asian origin parliamentarians in the United Kingdom. And he's also very popular in his constituency, that I know myself. He has remained Shadow Minister for Defence, Procurement and Europe previously, and as a member of parliament he has been involved in various initiatives aimed at improving the livelihood of the people of Birmingham and promoting social justice. He is widely respected for his commitment to public service and his advocacy for social justice, and I am witness to it. Honorable Mr. Khalid Mahmood, please address the session. Thank you.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Very kind of you, Ranjit Saab, and a great friend, and I've learned a lot about Pakistan from yourself. And of course, Mashed Bhai, who I've known for a lot longer. Always fantastic to be able to listen to you and speak to you, and always we go away with some learning that we do that. The rest of the delegations, I'd like to thank very much for being here today. Constitution in crisis. So, is the Constitution in crisis? And what is the Constitution, and how do we deal with the Constitution in crisis? I think to be, first of all, a member of the Assembly, you have to be a Democrat. And you have to understand what that entails. Democracy is a very easy thing to say, but a very difficult issue to practice. Democracy is not just elections. That is probably the most easiest part of democracy. As has been said before, the most important issue of democracy is accountability, scrutiny, and the rule of law. Those are the key principles. Because if we as parliamentarians listen to those issues, abide by those topics, abide by the principles of what they say, then we should be able to represent our people much better. So I think understanding democracy is the most important part before we get to a constitution. And the constitution, as is said by Mr. Farah and other people, is something that is not just living, but as Mohsen Saab said, a breathing entity. It should lead the country in times of difficulties if we have the courage to abide by it. This 1973 Constitution of somebody who I admired for a long time, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, as a British citizen, as a British young person growing up, and the things that were done in 1973 are not being done now. I think that is the potential problem. Understanding what democracy is about, understanding what tenure of Parliament is. And what we don't understand, and I was able very quickly to look at some of the issues in terms of the Constitution, and where with the current situation, the current crisis in the Constitution exists, I don't agree with that. If you look at the Constitution, I think it's section 3, paragraph 52. The National Assembly shall, unless sooner dissolved, continue to serve for a term of 5 years from the day of its first meeting and shall stand dissolved at the expiration of that term. So where's the crisis in Pakistan? That is in the Constitution that everybody says that they abide by. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. So perhaps I look at things a bit more plainly than my esteemed, noble and honorable colleagues who have dealt with law for a long time. So if the Constitution states that in terms of what it does, we in the United Kingdom, mother of parliaments, we have people who have abrogated themselves from the National Assembly, the Houses of Commons and Parliament. Predominantly the Northern Ireland parties that have decided not to sit in Parliament. So if they don't take the oath, they don't sit in Parliament, they are not entitled to take any fees, any salaries, or any support as parliamentarians because they have abrogated themselves from Parliament. So let's look at what being a Democrat is. So if you abrogate yourself from those principles, how do you move forward? When people abrogate themselves, they lose the rights as parliamentarians. And then when you stand to throw stones from the side and say, we want a new election, what right is there to call for that when you yourself absented yourself from Parliament? The biggest betrayal of any democracy is those that are elected to abrogate themselves from that democracy that they've been elected for a given term, which is in the Pakistan Constitution, the 50 years anniversary that we are here to celebrate. Those are the fundamental parts of when we say that we're in crisis. As I said before, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. But the simple issue is look at things simply. Let's not get too technical about these things. Let's look at what's right. We in the United Kingdom had a Prime Minister you might know called Boris Johnson, who some few years ago decided that he wanted to prorogue Parliament for about 3 weeks more than it should be. Isn't a huge thing? A member of Parliament from Scotland decided to appeal against that to the Supreme Court. The full bench of the Supreme Court sat, all 12 members of the Supreme Court sat, and decided, after serious deliberation, that the Prime Minister of the time has not functioned and executed his role within the precedents of law in the United Kingdom. And I speak about the precedents of law in the United Kingdom because we don't have a written constitution. So we have to rely on the precedents of law. And they went back, some of them I think, to about 1250, to look at some of the historical events of Parliament. When you had Charles I in 1642, invading the House of Commons at the time, looking for the people, which he called traitors, which Oliver Cromwell was part of, along with Guy Fawkes and a number of others. And the Speaker at the time, Speaker Lenthal, said, "Sire, I have nor the eyes to see with, nor the ears to hear with, nor the tongue to speak with, unless commanded by this place to do so." That is the supremacy of Parliament. That was something that we gained in 1642, because it takes the right people to stand up to tyranny, to do the right thing for the people that they represent. Because we're not there in our own right, we are there to do the right thing for the people that we serve. The Iraq War. We had over 2 million people on the streets demonstrating. Most of us disagree with it. I disagreed with it. But because the government had the time to continue until its next duration, which I said in section 3, paragraph 52 says in your constitution as well, this cannot be done unless that term has expired. I'll just give you a current example now in Parliament in the United Kingdom. We've had, since 2019, 3 changes of prime ministers. And it's really abhorrent, as far as we're concerned, as far as the Labour Party, the opposition is concerned, that we need to have a change of leadership, because they've been managed to do this 3 times. They've been managed to do this 3 times because we stick to the term, 5-year term, unless voted out by the Parliament. We're the opposition. We don't have the votes to take them out. So the precedents, the rule of law stays and Parliament stands. 3 people that we didn't want in Parliament. 3 people have not gone to people to be elected. But we have to abide by the rules. We turn up every day to Parliament and say and oppose them every day. But we can't turf them out, because that is the term that is set down in our unwritten constitution, in our precedents of law, which you have in your written constitution. So I think these are the issues before we put ourselves into turmoil, before democracy puts itself into turmoil. And the Constitution doesn't do that. It is the elected politicians, and in some cases the judiciary, that does that. It is people who try to exercise influence outside their sphere of what they are legally entitled to do. And what we need to be able to do, if I can just have a couple of seconds from the gentleman on the right, please. Excuse me? Thank you. If we have those people who exercise outside of the remit that they're entitled to. Whether it's the military, as it's been in the past year, whether it's individual politicians, whether it's the judiciary. Democracy entitles you to be in the remit that is afforded to you by the Constitution. And I think if people stop breaking those terms under which they should act, I think it becomes difficult. And that's why the Constitution is in turmoil. That's why the country is in turmoil. That's why these things happen. There's so much clamor in this country that has gone on. Last year, there was a huge humanitarian disaster in this country, sir. 31 million people at least, still I believe, have no formal homes, aren't on any electoral register, and just about managed to survive with a huge amount of disease and illness that is there for them. So what's our responsibility as Democrats? What's our responsibility as elected leaders? Is not just to one particular individual group, but the country as a whole. When you have so many people that have been affected by a huge natural disaster, then shouldn't we be looking at that? When was the last time, when is the last time here that there was any discussion on those people? In the mainstream media, I try to watch as much as I can, and sometimes I get a bit frustrated because there are huge amount of news channels, and there are a huge amount of experts as well. And what the issue is, when you have a huge amount of national news daily coverage, everyone has to appear to be relevant. So when your constitution says that term is for 5 years, and then somebody else says something else, so instead of looking at the first issue, you move on to subsequent issues, and you start discussing them. And this is what's happening at the moment. Nobody understands really where we started from in this dispute, and nobody really knows where we're going to end up. And it has to be for the people. It has to be for the sake of people. Not as us, as individuals. I've been, for huge thanks to my constituents, elected for 6 times. So I'm not on any designated seat. I am elected every time, and I've been elected for 6 terms as a Member of Parliament in Birmingham, Paribas. I understand my role. My role, first of all, is to my constituents, then it is to Parliament, where I will sit with my party, and as a Democrat, sometimes I may not like everything that my party puts forward. But because we operate as a democratic group, my obligation is therefore to vote for that. And those are the issues of democracy. That is what democracy is about. It's not about individuals, because as an individual, you're very limited to who and what you are. So that is the real importance, to understand what we can do. It's important for the judiciary to understand where its cutoffs are, and different people within that to understand that. Parliament is always supreme, as my learned friend Mushahid Saab has already said. Parliament has to be supreme, because you in Parliament are the ones that are elected directly by the people. They give you that franchise. They give you that ability. And we should take that very, very seriously. That is what democracy is about. Democracy is about the hard work for your constituents and coming in here and legislating the right thing for the right reasons. So we need to look at all these issues and to see, why do you put your country into such turmoil? It can't be based on personalities. If that was the case, we would still have Boris Johnson as our Prime Minister. He's tried his very hardest to do that. But because there's a term due, we as the Labour Party who want this election to be called now, called yesterday, called 3 years ago, we can't, because the term stipulates so, to do that. So I think we have to remember what our obligations to the Constitution and to Parliament are before we start to take our personality forward. I will just end with a couple of issues, and I, in most terms, agreed with my brother Mushed Saab, always learn a lot from him. But I will never call India a democracy. I will never call India a democracy. It doesn't behave in a democratic matter. It doesn't behave in a democratic matter when it comes to Kashmir, where they suppressed the people for over 70 years. It doesn't behave as a democracy when it comes to the Indian Muslims, when it comes to the Indian Sikhs that are based there, the Indian Christians that are based there, when it comes to the Dalit community, the lower caste community.